My name is Mildred. It was a regular day in my office until my assistant buzzed in, saying there was a woman claiming to be family. The word family sent a shiver down my spine. It was a term I'd locked away years ago, along with a whole host of painful memories. I took a deep breath, steadying my voice as I said, "Send her in." When the door opened, I caught a whiff of her perfume, a sickly, sweet blend of vanilla and a hint of something I could only describe as guilt. She walked in, looking just as I remembered her, perfectly coiffed hair, a string of pearls around her neck, and that confident air that commanded a room before she even spoke. "Hi, Mildred," she said, spreading her arms wide as if this was a long, awaited reunion rather than an uninvited intrusion. I stood up slowly, my eyes fixed on her. "Mom," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. She glanced around my office, taking in the glass walls, the framed patents on the wall, and the soft hum of success that filled the air. "So, this is where all the magic happens," she said, a smug smile on her face. "You didn't even tell us." Can you imagine my surprise when I read about my own daughter in Forbes? I forced a smile, though it felt more like a grimace. "You could have called," I said. "Oh, I did," she said casually. "You changed your number. I thought you were just busy, so I decided to pay you a visit. Families should celebrate together, don't you think?" Her words were honey, sweet, but her eyes were scanning my desk as if searching for something.
Emotion for her to sit.
She opened her purse with exaggerated care and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "Actually, I've been thinking a lot about everything I've done for you," she began. "All the sacrifices, all the years of raising you and your sister. It hasn't been easy." A cold chill ran down my spine. "What are you talking about?" I asked. She unfolded the paper and slid it across my desk. "This," she said, smiling. I looked down and saw typed lines itemizing all sorts of things: private school fees, the cost of meals, and even something listed as emotional labor. And at the bottom, a neat total, $1 million. I looked up at her in disbelief. "You're asking me to pay you $1 million for being my mother?" Her smile didn't waver, but her eyes hardened. "For everything I gave up, for all the things you could never repay," she replied sharply. My breath caught in my throat. "Family doesn't work like that," I said, my voice trembling. "Family?" she snapped. "Family doesn't abandon the woman who gave them everything." I swallowed hard, summoning all my courage. "You chose to have me, Mom. Children don't owe their parents just for being born." For the first time, I saw a flicker of doubt in her eyes. Then she leaned closer. "Can't or won't. I could have had a life, a career, a husband who didn't leave. But I gave it all up for you." Her words echoed in my ears, but I felt a strange sense of calm inside. I'd spent my whole life trying not to upset her, but that ended right then and there. "I'll help with your expenses," I said quietly, "but not this." Her face froze, and then she stood up. "Then you're no longer my daughter," she said, smoothing her jacket as if she was erasing a bad memory. At the door, she turned back. "Your father would be ashamed of you," she spat. As the door closed behind her, the silence that followed was heavy, like a weight on my chest. But it was also a kind of release, a finality I'd never thought I'd feel. I sat there for a long time, just staring at the piece of paper on my desk, the invoice for motherhood. Tears welled up in my eyes, but they weren't the loud, angry kind. They were slow, measured drops, like the last bit of pain my body had been holding onto for decades finally seeping out. By morning, I'd stopped crying. I was done with the pain, done with the false expectations. I walked into the lab before dawn, the machines humming softly, like old friends. I started a new experiment, writing down notes with the same precision I always had. I told myself that this was how I'd heal, with order, with proof, and with a new identity.
Dr.
Ava Reed found me an hour later, holding a cup of coffee. She looked at me, then at the empty space in my eyes. "She came, didn't she?"
she asked.
I didn't even bother asking how she knew. She always seemed to know. "She wants $1 million, I said, my voice flat.
Dr.
Reed didn't flinch. "And what do you want?"
she asked.
I thought for a long time before answering. Peace, I said, but I don't think it comes with a refund. That night, I sat on the bathroom floor of my office, still wearing the dress from a work party. My hands were trembling so badly, I could barely breathe. I looked at myself in the mirror, and the woman looking back at me seemed like a stranger, calm, detached. I remembered all those Sunday dinners at home, when Mom would say, "We do everything for you girls." I remembered the silent car rides home, when I'd try so hard to believe her. And I remembered all the times I'd made excuses for her cruelty, thinking it was just stress. But now, I could see it for what it was, not sacrifice but control. She gave so she could own me. I texted my business partner, Ethan, "Don't come by tonight. I need to think." 2 days later, I met with my lawyer. I told him to set up a trust for my mother, enough to cover her basic needs, but with strict conditions. She can't touch the principal. No withdrawals beyond the monthly stipend, I said. The lawyer raised an eyebrow. "You're protecting her from herself," he said. I shook my head. "I'm protecting myself from her." The calls started the following week. At first, they were full of anger. "You'll regret this, Mildred. You can't just erase me," she'd say.
Then the tone changed.
"I forgive you, sweetheart. Just send the money, and we can be a family again." By the third round, they turned into threats. "Maybe the media should know how ungrateful you are," she threatened. I stopped answering the phone. Ethan watched me one night as my phone lit up over and over again. "You don't have to read them," he said. "I'm not," I replied. "I just want to see how far she'll go." Eventually, the messages slowed down, and the noise faded into silence. One morning, there were no more missed calls, no new emails. Just quiet. And that quiet felt like a victory. A month later, Dr. Reed called me into her office again. "You've been working like a woman on a mission," she said softly. "Is it over?" I nodded. "Almost." She handed me an envelope. "Take this weekend off. Go somewhere peaceful, away from all this." Inside was a ticket to a coastal retreat. That night, I stood by my office window, looking at the city lights reflected on the glass. I thought about the woman who raised me, how she'd confused fear with love and guilt with loyalty. And I thought about myself, finally free, finally breathing in a life that was truly my own. 3 months later, there was an acquisition ceremony for our company. It was all lights, cameras, and champagne. We'd been valued at $8 million. I smiled for the photos, shook hands, and said all the right things. But under the surface, there was a small scar, a reminder of the last thread I'd cut with my mother. After the speeches, I stepped outside for some fresh air. The night was cool, and the Pacific wind felt like a cleansing. Ethan joined me, handing me a glass of water instead of champagne. "Are you okay?" he asked. "I am," I said, and this time I really meant it. But peace, I've learned, is a fleeting thing. 8 years passed, and our company thrived. We continued to build, to heal, to live. Then, one autumn morning, as I was driving through Seattle for a conference, I saw her again. She was sitting on a curb outside a coffee shop, holding a paper cup in her hand. Her gray hair was a mess, and her eyes were dull, but there was no mistaking her. For a moment, I forgot how to breathe. The world went quiet in that dangerous way it used to. I parked my car, bought 2 coffees, and sat down beside her. At first, she didn't recognize me. Then, she whispered my name, "Mildred?" like a question she was afraid to finish. We talked for about an hour, sharing half-truths and fragments of our lives.
She said she was sick.
Pride had taken what the world hadn't. When I left, I arranged for help through the trust. It wasn't out of a sense of duty as a daughter, but as a human being refusing to be cruel. I didn't forgive her that day, but I stopped letting her story define mine. As I drove away, the city seemed softer, as if it was finally letting me go. I didn't tell anyone about that meeting for a long time, not Ethan, not Dr.
Reed.
It didn't feel like a secret. It felt like closure. The following week, I got a call from the social worker handling her case. They said she'd accepted the help, but refused to list me as an emergency contact. I almost laughed. Even at the end, she wanted the last word. But I didn't fight it. I just focused on the fact that she was safe, that she had food and shelter. The rest was no longer my problem. Some nights, I'd sit on my balcony, looking out over the city. I'd think about how peace isn't a loud, explosive thing. It doesn't roar like revenge or crash like heartbreak. It's a quiet hum, like the machines in the lab that used to be my whole world.
Dr.
Reed retired that winter. At her farewell dinner, she took my hands in hers and said, "You've built everything you once wished someone would build for you. Don't forget to rest in it." I promised her I'd try. Ethan and I continued to grow our company slowly, carefully. We set up scholarships for girls in science, kids who reminded me of myself when I was young and full of hope before the silence of family rejection hardened my heart. Every time I saw one of those girls light up with excitement over a new discovery, something inside me softened a little. One morning, a letter arrived. There was no return address, just my name written in a shaky hand. Inside, there was a single line on a plain piece of paper. "Thank you for the coffee." There was no apology, no signature. But it was enough. That evening, I drove to the lake near our old neighborhood. The water was still, like it was holding its breath before dawn. I whispered a goodbye that no one heard and let it sink into the ripples. Freedom didn't look like victory with confetti and cheers. It looked like calm, a calm I'd finally earned. I don't hate my mother. I don't love her either. I just wish her peace, but far away from mine. If you've ever had to build yourself up from the silence your family left behind, know this: you don't owe anyone for surviving. You don't need to forgive them to be free. Share your story in the comments. Someone out there needs to hear it. And if this story found you, stay. There's more to tell.